All right, so picking up from the previous video, there's a few things that I want to fix up with respect to the kind of the look and feel of this. And then we need to start actually using the real data as opposed to all of these placeholders that we have here. Now, one of the things that bugs me a little bit is if you look at this image, you'll see these really sharp edges right here. And I really don't care for that. And so there's an easy way to get rid of that is just to give it a corner radius. So right up here on image, I can say dot corner radius, and we'll give it, let's say 5. And when we do that, now we have a nice rounded corner there. So again, if we kind of zoom in, we can see that. And I think that finishes off the image a little better. The other thing is that I want to sort of differentiate the font for Chicago from this population. And so what we can do is we can come down here and say dot font, and we can give it a specific sort of pre-format, and they're all of different types. So as I hit the dot here, you can see we can do body, call out, caption, footnote, the various titles and so forth. I'm going to do, let's try title 3. And when we do that, didn't really, okay, it increased it a little bit, but maybe we'll do, let's try title 2. And so I kind of like that for a size. And then the other thing is I'd like it to be more bold. So we can say dot font weight dot bold. And so that looks better. So I think we're looking good there. I think I like that. So we've done some changes here. Now, what we want to do is we want to get rid of these sort of things that we've hard-coded in and actually use data that will be passed in. So what we can do is we can start out and say, well, we're going to have a var for the city name. And we're going to have one for the city image name, because we're going to need to be able to get it from our image library. And we're going to need population, which will be an int. And we're going to need a rating, which is also going to be an int. And rather than pass, because when we do this, then you'll see we could do city name here. We can do, I'm sorry, this is for the image name. So we could do the city image name here. We can do the actual city name here. We can do the population here. And then the star rating view, we're going to have to pass this rating down to it so that it can give us the number of stars that we want. We'll need to make some changes for that. But what I wanted to show here is this could be done this way, but what I don't like about it is, first of all of these would need to be at state variables. But we're going to change this. So I'm not going to put at state in for all of them. And why do they need to be state? Well, because if these change in any way based on the caller, then these UI elements need to be updated. And so state is important that we are able to do that. So what we want to do is pull this out, and we can create another struct out of this. So I could say struct city line config, like it's a configuration of how to configure this line, and then paste these items in. And so now I have this nice struct, and here is where I'm just going to reference the struct. So I'm going to say at state var city line config. Oh, sorry, this is going to be, let's call it config is the variable, city line config. And now we have a configuration, a config struct with these elements that we can use. So coming down in here, I can change this image out to be config dot city image name. And then down here for the actual city name, I can say config dot city name. And then here for population, we can use string interpolation, and we can say here config.rating. And then we're going to pass this not rating. This is going to be population. And then we're going to pass rating down here when we're ready to do that. So what we've done is we've modified this so that it's going to take one of these config line items and actually use that data that is passed in rather than having it all hard-coded, which is what we need. So of course, the city line view here is no longer working because it's saying that, hey, we're missing an argument when we call this. And that's right, because this is the thing that we need to call. So if I just click on the suggestion and say fix, it puts that in. And then what we're going to do is let's declare a city line config right here to start with. So we can do static var config is city line config, open paren. So we'll do this as an initializer. And this is static. So that whenever things don't complete, it's a clue that you may have typed something incorrectly, right? So now we're saying we're going to do this open paren, and sure enough, I get the various elements that we can fill in. So I'm going to hit enter here. So city name, we'll go ahead and keep running with Chicago, and then I'm going to hit enter and take this down to the next line. City image name was just Chicago, all lowercase. Population is an int. We'll put 3 in for 3 million. And rating, I'm going to put 5 because I live in Chicago and I'm going to give it 5 stars. So now this structure that we just declared from this can be passed in. And so we can put config here, and I'll go ahead and build and see if we get a successful build. And we did. And I'm going to go over here and resume. And let's go ahead and hit execute here. And we're good. We are showing exactly what we had hoped based on the data we have here. And in fact, if I were to, change this to New York, we should see this change over here. So just to try this out to see if this is working, if I were to type in here New York as an example, and then I would click resume, I should see New York come up here in our preview. And we do. So this is looking good. I'm going to go back to Chicago here. And one of the other things I want to show you is, let's suppose you wanted to see this both with dark mode and light mode to see how it looked. Well, one of the things you can do is come up here and I can click on this duplicate. So we've duplicated this. Let's go ahead and resume first. So one of the other things I want to show is, suppose you wanted to see what this looked like in dark mode. You could just go up here and change it by clicking here and doing that. But a lot of times you're going to want both views all the time. So let's just make sure we're not running here, which we're not. And we're going to click on this duplicate icon. And that's going to give us 2 of these. Now, these are identical as it created 2 different city line views here. But this is the one that we want to, let's say, be in dark mode. So we can click on the configuration, click on the color scheme of dark, and what this will do is it will give us our view here in dark mode, and sure enough, there we are, we're set. And if we come over here, we can see how it modified the code. It put .preferred color scheme of dark, And now we have them both light and dark. So any more changes that we do here, we can kind of see in both cases. All right, so now let's get our star rating to work based on the actual rating that we give it. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here to our star rating view, and notice we have no parameters right now, and we've hard-coded it to go up to 5 or 0 to 4. So let's first of all add a parameter. So we can say at state var rating is going to be an int. And then if we have this variable, what is it that we want it to do? What do we want to do with it? Well, let's say rating is a 4, then I want this number to be a 4. If rating is a 3, I want this number to be a 3. So the way we can do that is just put in rating. So if I put rating here, then depending on what is passed in, that's how many stars we're going to get. Now, the other thing we could do is say that we want to limit it to a maximum of 5 stars. So if you put in 20 stars, you're still only going to get 5. And the trick, sort of the mathematical trick to do that, is I can say min for pick the minimum between two numbers, 5 and rating. And when I do that, what this is doing, let's say rating is 20. Well, the minimum of 5 or 20 is always 5. But if I put a 4 in, the minimum of 5 and 4 is 4. So you can look this up and Google it to see how I got that. But that's kind of the trick to saying we're only going to limit it up to 5 stars. So now, of course, down here, our preview is complaining. Why? Because we've now added a new parameter here. And we need to, I'm going to close this drawer out here so we don't need that. And we're going to need to pass it in a value. So if I go back here and I do open paren, I see rating. I'm going to hit rating. And let's try a 3. So if I put a 3 there, and let's go ahead and recompile. Now I have a build fail. And why is that? Well, if I go up here, I click on this guy, and I see where it's complaining, and I click on that. So we had this star rating view one level up, right? Our city line view is going to call this star rating view, but now it's complaining because we don't have this parameter. So we can add that parameter in. And now the rating for this is going to be the rating that came off of this struct, right? We have the struct coming in, and there is the rating. So the struct is actually declared as a variable called config. So we would say config.rating here. And now if we do a compile, it looks like we should succeed. Fingers crossed. We did. So let's go back to our star rating view here and go ahead and hit resume. And we should only see 3 stars. And we do. Because we passed in a 3 here, we only get 3 stars. And if we wanted to try 3, 4, and 5, you guessed it, you could probably just copy this. Let's, if I say, this actually has to be, so if we want to try this with 4, we can just put a 4 in there. And sure enough, we get 4 stars. So this looks like that's working the way we want. And up here, if we go back to the city line view, which calls this, depending on what we passed in for a configuration here, we should see those number of stars. So looks like we have a green scenario right now. Let's see if we change this to a rating of 4, what happens over here. So if we do a resume, and sure enough, we now have 4 stars. So that's working. That's all good. So now the next thing is we wanted this entire list to give us all of these items. So what we want to do is go up one more level to our city list here. And what we want to do is Of course, we didn't get any errors because the city list isn't here. So since it's not called, there aren't any errors associated with it. So what we want to do is say, well, the destination can still be this, but we're not going to do this H stack anymore here with this. We're going to actually call our city line view instead. But the other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to need to fix up our favorite cities so that it actually has all of the data that we need. So we remember that favorite cities is actually defined here in our content view. But if I just jump to definition here, I can just go straight to it. And here is where the favorite cities struct is set up. So what we want to do is favorite cities needs to remain identifiable. So it needs to have this ID. But of course, this piece of it right here can be that configuration data or config struct that we created before. So we could just say here config, and then we can say city line config, and that defines now this config data that we're going to continue to pass down. And of course, all of this is an error now because when we create a favorite cities, it's not as easy as just applying the city. We have to apply the config and the data that goes into that configuration. So just to show you how to do that, and then we'll zip through it quickly, is essentially, let me just comment this out. We're still going to do @state var favorite cities, but it's going to be an array. Just go ahead and put some space in there. So when I do favorite cities like this, and then I do open paren, I get config now rather than just city. So I'll say config. And now it's city line config. That's the struct. So city line config, open paren, and I see the data that I need to give it. So what I'm going to do is say, well, we'll do Chicago like we did before. Chicago, population 3 and rating 5. And so we're going to do this now for the other 4 cities. So we're building up our array. And the only real difference is that instead of just this simple string, which was what we were showing before, we now have this config of 4 different items that actually build up the list. All right, so now that we've modified our data, so that we've modified the array to be initialized by this favorite cities struct, what we want to do is go back to our city list, and we see that we have a couple areas where we don't compile, and that's because we're still referencing the way favorite cities used to be defined as opposed to the way it is now. We had a favorite which came in, and that would have been the city property, which was a string, but we don't have that anymore. Now, what we have is we have a config property. So I'm going to type in config, and then I know that it's city name. Now, for whatever reason, Xcode is not completing this, which is usually a sign that we have something wrong with our code. And so when Xcode is not completing for you, that's something that you want to be careful of, and maybe go back and look and see if you have a mistake somewhere else that's preventing it. For whatever reason, this is fine, right? If I do Command B here and compile, I get a build that says that this is fine. Now, this is still wrong, but this works. So I'm not sure why that happens. Xcode sometimes does get confused, and so you just have to sort of run with it. And here we have our H stack, and our H stack is not something we want anymore, right? What we want to do is have that city line view put in here. So what we're going to do is take this out, and we'll go here and say city line view, and then open paren, and it completes for us config. So I'll hit enter there, and then favorite, which is what's being passed in here, .config is what we're going to pass down. And now we're passing down all of that data that is in here, right? We're passing down city name, city image, name, population, and rating. That's what's coming down right here. And that's going to go to our city line view to be displayed. So if I save this and I build, we get a good build. So now let's bring open our canvas and see how this looks. If we open up the canvas and we say resume here, we'll let it resume. Now it already had this image from the last time I tested this, but basically we have a green dot, which means that we're all good and we can see what our list view looks like. And of course, if we tap on Chicago, let's turn on, make sure it's running. So we're gonna click it on here to do live preview. So we have our preview window here. We can click on edit. We can rearrange these like we would like. Hit done. That looks good. We can tap into it. We can get the detail view. That looks good. And then we should be able to delete as well. Let me go in here. I'm going to tap delete and hit delete. And notice what happened here. This actually looks like a bug to me in SwiftUI. It looks like the total size changed where it increased the height of each one of these cells in some way. So, but it doesn't even look like it did the same for each. It looks like they grew differently. So if I hit done here, I now have these spaces between them. So this seems like a bug to me, but I think there's a way we could potentially work around it. If I go to the city line view here, this was the view that we had set up, and we noticed that the H stack, which is right here, that I select that, we have these blue lines right at the very bottom and top. So it's basically using the size of this image as the maximum size. Now, one of the things that we could do too is we could move this Chicago and population kind of more up here to the top. And we could, if we just did that, so for example, on this V stack right here, we have these two text items. If I were to just put a spacer right here, it would bring it all the way up to the top because there's nothing limiting it in that height restriction. So it goes, that's not what we want, right? We want it to just be the top of this. So one of the things we could do is actually set the height of this particular H stack. So if we go to H stack here and I say frame height and let's say 80, now what happens is we see that we're kind of right at the top of this, and we are limited by the fact that this line, or this view, if you will, here is only going to be 80 pixels high. So it looks still a little high to me. I'm not sure I like it put there. I'm going to just take the spacer out so it'll be centered again. But I am going to leave this height here because that turns out fixes our issue here. So what's going to happen is we're going to go ahead and let this refreshed. And now if I come in here and I say I'm going to delete you, and I'm going to delete you, and I say done, everything works accordingly. So we were able to work around the issue. Unfortunately, it looks like a SwiftUI bug to me, but we were able to make the changes that we needed and get it to work as we wanted it to.